Welcome to the service this morning. So here we go. We are. This is our final week of our 4-week series on David's son, Absalom. And I'd like to give you a brief recap of what we have looked at for the past 3 weeks. And in week 1, we looked at the perversion of the literal sense of the word into various justification like for revenge. And in week 2, we saw how strong the appeal of Absalom is. That is, how appealing a false principle is. And week 3, Absalom dies in the woods. We saw this weird image of Absalom dying in the woods as his head is tangled up in terebinth or oak tree. And this is about how contradictions of the literal sense that we pick and choose from the word at our own will, and how they fail themselves, or how they kill our reasoning and our judgment. But we are going to see some bright light at the end of the dark tunnel. We are on the path to greatness. And week 4 today, David is back in charge, and that is what we are going to look at. But before we do that, we don't know that he goes through a series of events. Toward the end of chapter 18, he hears about the death of his son, and he mourns over him. And in chapter 19, the first part of it, he is still mourning him. His grief is severe, as we can see in this short reading. Then the king, David, was deeply moved and went up to the chamber of the gate and wept. And as he went, he said thus, "O my son, Absalom, my son, Absalom, if only I had died in your place. O Absalom, my son, my son." And Joab was told, "Behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. The people heard it said that day, "The king is grieved for his son." And the people stole back into the city that day as people who are ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. But the king covered his face, and the king cried out with a loud voice, "O my son, Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son." I mean, he is really, really desperate. He's grieving. And I think David is almost blinded by his love of his son. And this is about how we have love for the literal sense of the word, or teachings that are part of our identity. So in a way, David is not yet back. He is still processing his son's death. And did you notice how much of the reading was about his mourning? And how hard it is for David to get over with it. So, before we dive into our bigger message that David is back in charge, we want to look at how it all unfolds, or what happens beforehand, because there is a process to lead to that. And in fact, the story and even the big message is not like, "Oh, Absalom the rebel dies and the King David is back in charge." It is not going like that. It's not simple and smooth like that. The whole story involves a deeper dynamic in the family, in the relationship between the father and the son. And then what about us? For us, it is about the dynamic between different types of loves that we have. And in a way, it is about us discerning what kind of love that we are going to choose that is going to rule our life. Is it going to be Absalom? Or is it going to be David? And obviously we have looked at Absalom's rule failed. I mean, we remember that his ruling was full of violence toward whom? Toward his own family. That shows how the leadership of our false principle can fail or might have failed in our life already. And here is a real life story that I'd like to introduce. And it can echo with our realization that we might have pursued a wrong principle or wrong measure. It can echo with our bitter realization that our measures were really wrong and even destructive. So, this is a story released in a news article in 2022. And there were parents who sent their teenage kids to these Christian camps in Wyoming ranches in the United States. And let me tell you, things did not go as the way the parents thought they would. And let's just say that they did not know how the camps would treat their kids. Probably their hope was that their troubled teens or their kids who are going through some hard times, they're going to become better or even healed after the camps. But it turned out that those Christian camps winded up being accused of abusing the teens. And reportedly, those teens were forced to do heavy farm work. One man says he was branded with a cross. The women say they were tied to a goat as a punishment. And just, there are way more worse cases under Christian church and program. And you know what? Those teens did not recall their experience there as one of the life-changing moments of their life. But they called it as a nightmare of hard labor and humiliation. And we can't know the details, but we can at least assume that those camps might have had this crooked measure that will teach you a lesson in a hard way. Or we will and we can make you behave better way in few days while you're here. And to me, that really sounds to be one of those examples that we have looked at as the examples of Absalom. All those justification and hard measures. And I know, and I admit that this is a little bit extreme example. But let's just say that we were the parents. We might have naively believed that those Christian camps would be awesome just because they go by Christian. We have this tender heart about what belongs to church, about what the church does. And because of our love like that, we sometimes become a little gullible, become a little blinded. But how would we feel if we later on, that something we counted on like that turned out to be a total disaster? And what would happen when we walk up to that? But what comes first is our mourning, our grief. And this is David. And there is our bitter realization, maybe our blinded trust was wrong. In times like this, I know it can be really difficult, but our job is to accept that we need to let go of whatever conviction and belief we had. We are going to say that, yes, we were wrong. And I think it is okay to say that. And there comes remorse and grief about what if things might have been a little bit different? What if our judgment were constructive rather than being some destructive? And again, that is like David mourning for his dead son. But we need to let go of it because there are more important things, right? We can't forever regret for what has happened. We can't let our remorse overwhelm us forever. We need to know when to move on and how to move on. And David is, so to speak, in the story awakened to his senses that he still has the duty to lead the people, to protect his people. And the rest of our reading shows how it all goes down. Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, "Today you have disgraced all your servants who today have saved your life, the lives of your sons and daughters, the lives of your wives, and the lives of your concubines, in that you love your enemies and hate your friends. For you have declared today that you regard neither princess nor servants. For today I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, then it would have pleased you well. Now therefore, arise, go out, and speak comfort to your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you don't go out, no one will stay with you this night, and that will be worse for you than all the evil that has befallen you from your youth until now." So then the king arose and sat in the gate, and they told all the people, saying, "There is the king, sitting in the gate." So all the people came before the king. Again, David is awakened. David is realizing that there are more important things to care: the rest of his family, servants, and the people. And finally, David recollects his identity. Oh, I kind of forgot. I'm the king. And after that kind of brutal test, he regains his identity as the king. And now, that is how David's mourning is really, really over. Yes, finally, David's back in charge. And the key to all this is saying, he's saying this now, "Today I'm king over Israel." And I think that is the most dramatic change made throughout the whole series. David again retrieves his identity as the king and about his duty. And he makes it really clear. I'm the king. He makes it really clear that my judgment and my justice stands alone, nobody else's. For example, when Abishai asks, "Shall not Shimei be put to death?" because he cursed on David a lot. And you know what David said? David is saying that, "What have I to do with you, Abishai? I am king over Israel, and he shall not die." Another change we are seeing here is that David after the battle. He's not coming after his enemy. He's not punishing those who rebelled with Absalom. He must spare them. And if we read the whole chapter, we would see that David treats righteously with people. And that is a big change, considering that what kind of reign of Absalom wasn't all kind of violence, civil war, bloody war. And it's gone now. David's rule is different. Then what does that tell us about David's ruling in his differentiated character? It tells us that we are to work from something like David's character. His mercy, his forgiveness. And that is the Lord's measure. That is the Lord's approach. And his measure always looks something higher, something wonderful. And what does David represent? David represents the love of the neighbor. And we are letting his quality of his leadership into our life. And it is going to be nice. And as we are closing out our 4-week series, we can maybe we can forget everything else, but we can we can remember one thing. When the love of neighbor in a way rules our life, when it is leading our life, things can really change. Like, we've got this harsh heart. We have this mean tongue, right? What about our attitude? But those can become encouraging. Those can become sweet. And maybe most importantly, those can become humble. So there we go. That is our wrap-up of our series. And before ending the talk, I'd like to introduce a song. It's a Korean song that I really like. And I think this really fits the story well. And we're going to listen to the song at the end of the service. But the song is about the Lord's making us a star in the sky, metaphorically. So it is about how the Lord is raising our thought like a star, in the same way he does for David in the story. And there is an amazing and wonderful message about us being a star in the sky in the right orbit. And that means we are under the Lord's protection, and there isn't any more wars inside us. Our Christ is past. Amen.